lightning in a bottle. Merriam-Webster defines it as to succeed in a way that is very lucky or unlikely. The phrase originated as a reference to Benjamin Franklin's kite experiment, where he attempted to capture electricity from lightning and store it in a Leyden jar. But for this episode, I'm using it to describe the art of recording a drum track in music. I like to not get too bogged down in the technical aspects of it, but more to talk about the concepts and spirit of adventure in it. It's my favorite part of the job of being a drummer. It's the perfect melding of using technology to capture something that is often wild, primitive, and untamed, and preserve it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy while we explore the concepts of capturing and refining the sounds of feelings and emotions expressed on the drums. Welcome. Hi, my name is Matt. I've been a studio drummer for decades, and I've played on hundreds of recordings. I would even dare say that if you listen to the radio, watch movies, TV shows, commercials, or play video games, there's probably a pretty good chance you've heard my drumming at some point and not even know it. I've been very fortunate in my career to have been blessed with the opportunities to have my presence on recorded music so much. Unlike performing live, recording allows for ideas and feelings to be captured forever. But having said that, I'd also like to tell you that I am no expert at the right way to record drums. I'm fairly technically inept when it comes to recording gear. My drum technique is far from perfect. And to this day, when I sit down behind the drums to play, oftentimes my first thought is, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. And I hope today isn't the day they figure it out. But luckily for me, once I begin to play, it usually all falls into place and feels natural. And before I get any negative feedback on my thoughts on drumming in the studio, let me just say that creating music, as in any creative art form, is all just opinions. As I've said before, there is no right or wrong, just useful and not useful. It's all subjective, because the job is to be yourself and make your mark within the context of a song. As Miles Davis said, sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself. And the sounds I tend to gravitate towards are the imperfections, those interesting cracks in the glass of music. I often say that my goal is to play the wrong shit in the right way, to see what I can get away with. Because growing up listening to music, that's what I've always found the most interesting about music. Establishing the rules, and then seeing which ones I can break. But not just for the sake of being rebellious, although that spirit is important in music, but more to try and create something that fits my criteria of, is it special and is it necessary? Otherwise, it can easily sound overworked and self-indulgent. The job is not just to create, That's fine as a self-help exercise, but it's to connect, to tell the truth. That's why I place the importance of capturing an emotion or vibe in the music over capturing a flawless performance. Growing up listening to music, my favorite parts would be the weirdness and the details. If you were to ask me to choose between A or B, my question to you would be, well, which one's weirder? My favorite things as a listener would be those surprise moments that made me think, that is amazing. I enjoy the rule breakers. Some of the greatest musical moments and sounds came from the misuse and often abuse of the recording gear and instruments. Much of the equipment we musicians and engineers use was designed by technicians, designers, and inventors with set goals in mind. But sometimes, in the hands of unruly musicians and pirate producers and engineers, the equipment would be explored and used in a way the inventors hadn't anticipated, stretching the limits and capabilities of an instrument or piece of gear to discover something exciting about it, something interesting. Bottom line is what the rules of recording a great track depend on who you're asking. I remember years ago on a recording session with the late great David Briggs producing. He was known for his work on almost all the Neil Young records, who I would also record a track with years later. I was on the drums in the middle of a take when David stopped the tape. Then I heard his voice in the headphones saying to me, "You're thinking." I said, "Yes, I'm thinking about what I'm playing." He responded, "Yeah, nobody wants to hear you thinking on a record. The more you think, the more you stink. They want to hear you play." What he said got me to instantly let go and forget about myself. It's what I needed to hear at the time, and he knew it. Great producers can be warm and fuzzy or cold and prickly, but it is their sole job to oversee the capturing of lightning in a bottle. Not unlike a director on a movie set. Make a plan, stick to the script, get the best out of the players, and be keen enough to recognize and capture those beautiful mistakes and unplanned moments of creative spontaneity. I remember working with the great Daniel Lanois, who famously produced Bob Dylan, U2, among many others. Every time I had a recording session with him in his home studio, his instructions would be to bring no gear or instruments, and he would provide a conceptual setup for that day's session. One day, I arrived to find he had cleared all the furniture out of his enormous living room in his mansion in the hills. In the center of the room was an ancient ribbon microphone on a stand about 2 feet high. The idea was to set up the band around the room at different distances from the microphone to record a song on one mic, just like they used to in the old big band days. Since it was just one mic, the only way to mix and balance the sound would be to move closer or farther from the mic. For instance, the singer would sit in a chair 2 feet from the mic, playing an electric guitar through a small amp 10 feet from the mic, next to a bass amp 11 feet from the mic, and finally, my small drum set about 14 feet from the mic. Once we started recording, I was told the drums were a little too loud and to move back 2 feet. It ended up sounding amazing. What I love about that story was the spirit of adventure and exploration. Also, my favorite producers I've worked with are the ones that allowed me to indulge my sometimes weird ideas. They allowed me to feel safe enough to offer my dumb ideas to try out, in the off chance we find something special and rare that works. As long as I don't take too long to do it. Recording studios, engineers, and musicians can be expensive. so time is of the essence. The vibe is usually a relaxed urgency. I feel personally that I'm paid more for my ideas than I am my drumming technique. I don't have perfect technique. Far from it. As a matter of fact, I can go on YouTube and find children a third my age playing things on the drums that I not only couldn't play, but I also can't even imagine. But most of those flashy drummers you won't hear on great records. They tend to play at the song instead of in it. I used to also be more like that as a young drummer. I would practice and come up with a flashy new move. Then I would try to cram it into any song I could, regardless of what the song was asking for. I was playing the musical version of the phrase, "Look at me. Did you hear that?" It was the sound of my ego, coming from the body of a young, insecure me. As a young drummer, my goal was to be the greatest drummer that ever lived, to sound great. I think that's a natural instinct of a goal for a young musician. But somewhere over the years, my goal changed from trying to sound great on the drums to trying to make the other instruments and vocals sound great by what I play or don't play on the drums. The irony I found is that when I play that way, my drums sound the best. One of my favorite quotes about drummers comes from the legendary jazz trumpeter and vocalist Chet Baker. Chet said, "It takes a good drummer to be better than no drummer at all." I love that quote. I recently caught a lot of flack when I posted on an online drummer forum. Drummers were angry and offended, but I don't see it that way. I see it as Chet saying, if you're not going to bring something to the party, then just don't come. Again, is it special and is it necessary? Another important factor in the recording drums process is the instruments you're recording. I'm of the opinion that it ain't the drums, it's the drummer. My favorite drummers are the ones whose personality and individual uniqueness come out in their performance. You can just instantly hear who it is by how they play, not from the instrument they're playing. My favorite story about that comes from legendary guitarist Chet Atkins. The story goes that Chet had just come off the stage when someone said to him, "Man, that old guitar sounds great." Chet put the guitar in a chair and replied, "Yeah? How does it sound now?" One of my favorite things about recording is the opportunity to capture ideas. When I listen to bands or musicians' performance, the thing that interests me the most are ideas. I love listening to music and thinking to myself, what a cool idea. I'm as impressed by a flawless execution of a difficult part as the next guy, but I'm far more impressed by a clever, unique idea. It's the thing that I'm most envious of, way more than I am technical prowess. So when I'm recording a drum track, the wheels in my head start spinning, trying to come up with a way to not only accompany, support, elevate, and enhance the music, but also how can I do it in a unique way that also tells the truth and has a personality to it. I love the sound of a well-crafted musical instrument. There's a reason why classic legendary drums are constantly found on popular recordings throughout history. As my dad used to say, to do a job right, you need the right tools. The right instruments can be invaluable when constructing a good drum track, but I'm equally interested in deconstructing a drum track. Asking the question, what can I leave out? What can I add? And what can I get away with by fucking this up a little bit? But again, is it special? And is it necessary? In these pursuits, I've often tried strange ideas to find that sound that fits. I call this being a tone hunter. searching for tones that fit the essence of the song. I try to leave my ego and personal agendas outside the door so as to embody the spirit of experiment. No rules. If it sounds good, it is good. As I've said before, I look at an album as a movie I can watch in my head, and each song on the album is a pivotal scene in the movie. My job as a drummer I see as the lighting special effects guy on the set. Drums are usually the only instrument not playing melody. There are, of course, exceptions, but generally speaking, the drums are there to accompany the melody. We keep the time, but not just that. All the instruments should be able to keep time. We also can add textures to the melody. We provide light and shade for the melody. That's why I see my role in the melodical movie in my head as not an actor in the movie so much as the lighting special effects guy. The drums can provide attitude and vibe of the song. Is this an action-adventure scene? Do you need explosions and fire? Or is it a love scene? Do you need soft lighting and smoke and shadows and a laid-back feel to seduce? Or is it a sad and lonely scene? Do you need rain and darkness, etc., etc.? The drum track can provide the pacing of the scene. I'm not talking about just the tempo, but also where the groove sits in the song. I can pull it back to make it feel fat and lazy, or lean into it and give it a sense of urgency and anxiety. Basically, any emotion can be portrayed and conveyed by the drums in a song, especially if played with strategic confidence. Most recording sessions these days are performed to a click track, which is a designated track in the mix that provides the tempo, a metronome. An important skill in recording is to be able to play musically to it without sounding stiff, to be able to play behind the beat in a relaxed, lazy way, or to lean into it and play ahead of the click, pushing and propelling the time, or to play dead on the click, giving a strong confidence to the sound. All of these variants are subtle, and when the feel is established, it's what we drummers call pocket. Pocket is simply the feel of where the groove sits in the song. It's also where you can hear a drummer's true personality. Each drummer has a personal tendency to make a groove feel unique. My favorite drummers have their own unique pocket. They also have their own unique tone, not just from how they tune their drums, but more often how they hit them. I once read a story about how legendary drummer John Bonham of Led Zeppelin was being interviewed. When he was asked about a certain drum part, he jumped on a toy drum set he'd bought for his young son. It was sitting right next to him. And the interviewer noticed that even on a toy, you could instantly tell that it was John Bonham because of his unique pocket and the tones he got from how he hits it. You could hear his personality and confidence, even though he was playing on a toy. A common question I get is, how does one get a great drum sound? And I always answer that it's far too subjective a subject to answer simply. There are hundreds of factors. And at the end of the day, it's about what personally sounds pleasing, exciting, and interesting. If it sounds good to you, the producer or client, it is good. Let's take the snare drum, for example. The snare drum is probably the most signature sound of the drum set of all the pieces. I don't care if you're playing a 3-piece or a 20-piece drum set. The snare drum is home plate. I usually bring several snare drums to a session because changing out a snare is the fastest and easiest way to virtually change the whole sound and vibe of the whole kit. But there are almost a limitless amount of factors that go into affecting the snare drum sound alone. Things like, is it a wood drum or is it a metal drum? What kind of wood? What kind of metal? Diameter? Depth? What drum heads? And what are the drum heads made of? What snare strands? How many? Snare strand tensioning. Not to mention how the drum head is tensioned. Sometimes it's loose, sometimes it's tight. Sometimes it's evenly tensioned. Other times you might want to off-tension a lug or two. Is the head dampened with tape, gels, paper, wallet, etc.? Which sticks, mallets, brushes, hot rods, brooms, etc. are you hitting the drum with? Or are you just using your hands? How hard or soft is your stroke? What's the height of your stroke? What's the floor made of? Carpet? Wood? How big is the room? What's the height of the ceiling? And then there's the choice of microphones. And how are they placed? What's the distance? What's the angle? You get the idea. There is no one rule of how to get a great drum sound. Some drummers are stuck in their ways and insist on their signature sound. I'm more interested in a drum sound that fits a particular song. And again, is it interesting? The job is to accompany, support, elevate, and enhance the music. Sometimes I've even changed my drum sound just for certain parts of the song, like using a tight, ringy snare for the verses and a deep, low, puffy snare for the choruses. The sky is the limit. It all depends on your imagination and the imagination of the people you're working with. And that also goes for the mixing process. Once you've captured the performance on a tape or computer hard drive, there is now the whole other task of mixing. A process that provides even more options for the overall sound of the drums and how they blend with the rest of the instruments and vocals. Everything from setting the volume of each part of the drum set to EQing the frequencies, compressing the sound, expanding the sound, reverb, echo, distortion, etc., etc. Mixing is a whole other art form, as you can see, with more limitless possibilities. But now that I've sufficiently freaked you out with the overwhelming amount of information and possibilities, let's get back to the real purpose of a drum part. Again, it's to accompany, support, enhance, and hopefully elevate the music. When working on music with vocals, for instance, it is very important to showcase them with the drumming, learning how to punctuate certain vocal phrases with the drums, learning the dance of getting underneath and cradling them without stepping all over them. I heard that Miles Davis once said that he views drummers like boxers. They have to have quick reflexes and react fast to know when to duck and get out of the way, and when to step in and clean up. Knowing my role in this process is comforting to me. It's the mission. To make a song sound better with what and where I choose to play, or not play. The drummer's version of an artist's light and shadow is the use of space. Sometimes it's a good idea to just leave space for the other instruments and vocals. The music needs to breathe, and it needs air to do that. And the drums can provide that. Always asking the question, is what I'm playing or not playing making the musicians around me sound better? People generally only remember how you made them feel, and that factors into what I play. If I'm able to play something that makes the other musicians feel better about what they're doing, while also having a positive, upbeat attitude in the studio, people tend to want to hire me again. I noticed long ago when learning about some of the greatest, busiest session drummers who were my heroes and role models, that most of them were described as funny and fun to work with. The priority is first being good. But spending long hours in a claustrophobic controlled environment of a recording studio, having the ability to make it fun and drama-free is an equal priority of skill set. I've made some of my favorite recordings while going through intense emotional pain and heartbreak. But I left my personal problems outside, and I entered the studio with the spirit of being of service. And maybe I was even able to channel some of my pain into my playing and ideas. I don't know. I just know it didn't hurt the music. All of this factors into my favorite part of being a studio drummer. And that is coming up with a cool drum part. A cool drum part can make or break the song. I love how a cool drum part can become so iconic in people's memories as an unforgettable melody. When I've traveled the world and gone to third world countries and visited primitive cultures, I've noticed that all their ceremonies have specific rhythms. They have specific drum parts to accompany and tell the story of the emotion and tradition they're trying to convey. A cool drum part can be the most powerful thing in the world. And that goes back to when we were cavemen. But getting back to gear, I'd like to discuss more of the drum set. When I'm recording a whole album, I love when producers use a lot of microphones on my kit. It's not that they're all being used all the time, but in the end, it leaves more options. Selecting the right mics for each task is paramount. Some mics are designed to capture low frequencies like the bass drum, while others capture high frequencies like cymbals. And some work great at being placed far away to capture the whole room. For instance, the bass drum alone could have up to 6 microphones in and around it. One inside the hole to capture the true nature of the drum shell, one on the outside of the front head to capture the sound, along with sub-microphone made of a speaker cone to capture the ultra-low frequencies. Maybe a ribbon mic several feet away in front of the bass drum to capture some of the room ambience. And any other room mics around the room that capture their own ambient frequencies and sound. And maybe even a microphone on my side pointed at the drum pedal beater to capture the attack of the beater hitting the drum head. Then, in the mixing process, the producer and engineer have plenty of options to blend these separate tracks to achieve the perfect bass drum sound for the song. Some songs we might only use 2 or 3 mics to record the whole kit, while other songs may benefit from having over 20 mics on to create a blend. It's all artistic choices at that point. It's an unnatural process to create something that sounds natural. The art is to conceal the art. But I love the strategic challenge of it. I've made a few records where I made the artistic choice to see how little I hit a crash cymbal. This let the music really shine through, and it made the drums more defined. When I would eventually hit a crash, it would make it feel special and necessary. Once, I was on a break, hanging out in the alley behind the studio, leaning against a dumpster. I noticed how amazing the empty dumpster sounded when I kicked it. It was a giant boom sound. We happened to be recording a dark, sinister, sparsely arranged song next, and the light bulb went off in my head. I ran back in the studio and told the producer about this incredible industrial boom sound, and we decided to try it on the next song. We ran a long mic cable out the back door, attached to a $2,000 mic that we placed inside this giant empty dumpster. Then we ran a long headphone cable out to the alley so I could hear the music and kick the dumpster when it was time. The results were amazing. And this is an example of a weird, silly idea that worked in my imagination, and having an adventurous producer and engineer willing to try it. All of this kind of stuff reminds me of the enormous influence of artists like the Beatles, along with their producer George Martin, and Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. I'm not saying that they were the first to try strange ideas in the studio, but they were definitely the most influential at the time because they took these wacky ideas and put them in hugely popular mainstream records. They also let the world know that it was okay to have an album that wasn't just a collection of singles, but rather an entire piece to be experienced from start to finish. Not unlike watching a movie. Like them or not, their influence in music and popular culture not only changed what was possible in recorded music, but also changed the world and how we experience it. They created lush musical landscapes that my mind still explores, and I discover new details every time I hear them. And that is why Ringo is God. I can't stand when drummers bag on his drumming. To me, he and drummers like Earl Palmer and Hal Blaine of the infamous group of Hollywood session musicians known as the Wrecking Crew created a new landscape of the drummer's role in music. These guys just had a way of coming up with the right parts for the song, and they had style, taste, and talent. And again, had reputations for being easygoing and fun to work with. And they worked a lot as a result, setting the template for the rest of us studio drummers to try and emulate. There's a good reason why a drummer's seat is called the drum throne, and these are just some of the kings to sit upon it. Speaking of wacky ideas and drums, I've already covered drum gear a bit, and I'd like to address what I call hybrid kits. It's when objects are added or placed on a normal drum kit to enhance its tonal capabilities. I mentioned the dumpster kick drum story, but it doesn't end there for me. Drummers have unique opportunities to be able to hit any object and call it a drum for all intents and purposes. Sometimes I place percussion objects on the drums to give me more colors. The great jazz drummer Elvin Jones used to assign colors to each of his drums and cymbals. It's what he saw in his mind while he was playing. He saw colors. It allowed him to think like a painter, playing and blending sound colors. Sometimes I just play objects, not just as percussion overdubs, but sometimes as the main drum tracks themselves. I've literally picked items out of the trash, put an expensive great vintage microphone on them, and played them on recordings that have been nominated for a Grammy. There are no rules. The only limitations are your imagination and creativity. With the right ideas and ears, and a talented team to pull it off, there's no limits on what you can do. I love recording drum tracks on weird objects, so the listener thinks, that's a cool sounding drum track. But what the fuck is that? But everything I've played and recorded, I've stolen, to some extent, from somewhere. But how and where I place it in the music becomes my sound. As Picasso said, good artists borrow, great artists steal. As in, steal it, make it your own, and use it in a way that hasn't been done. And I'm a good thief. But hopefully, I use what I steal in a way you wouldn't detect where I stole it. To me, that's what all the greats have done, and that's what I aspire to do. I'm also a big fan of not judging too harshly. Some music grabs you right away, while others may have enough layers and nuance to only sink in after multiple listens. I just try not to get too hung up on, is it good? Will people like it? The first audience any musician has to win over is him or herself. If it sounds good, it is good. That's the only criteria that's important in making music. And when I'm making it, I play until it not only sounds good, but also makes me feel good. That's when I feel like my job is done. But for me, it is a job. I'm a good soldier, but every soldier needs a mission. Some days, I just feel like I don't have it. Like nothing I'm playing works. It can be a heartbreaking struggle to try and find that elusive inspiration. But I've learned from years of playing thousands of live shows around the world that the way I hear and feel about my playing has absolutely nothing to do with how someone else hears and feels it. Once I put the music out in the air, moving around the molecules, it's not mine anymore. It's up to the listener to decide its value and importance. Sometimes I've been pretty pleased and impressed with myself, only to find the listener was unimpressed. While other times, I've beaten myself up over my performance. To find praise from others. It makes no sense to me. But that's why I view the job as not music, but connecting. Music is merely the vehicle I use to get there. If I can connect, then I've done a good job. It's just not always easy to tell if I've made that connection until after the job is finished. But I look at it like I look at life. I'm in the showing up business. The results business is someone else's job to determine. So I just show up on time, with a positive spirit and decades of experience with an open mind and healthy body, and play my heart out and hope for the best. So I show up in the spirit of being of service, able to take direction without negative judgment or attitude. Be open to adventure and the unknown. Trust my instincts, but also be okay with the fact that I may be wrong. Try and make everyone else's job easier by my presence, from the producers, artists, musicians, engineers, managers, investors, all the way down to the assistant that makes my coffee. And something that I failed to fully grasp until later in my career that can be really helpful is, what is the song about? When I first hear a song, my tendency is to listen to the vocals and words as another instrument. It's not till later that I actually listen to the lyrics and what they're saying. When recording a drum track, sometimes it's really helpful to understand what the songwriter intended to say, or what the singer who's singing the songwriter's words is trying to say. Ask them. Don't be afraid to ask them. Whether the lyrics are abstract or telling an actual story, understanding them can help me get into character so I can better support them. The drums can help provide the attitude for the words. The drum track is the foundation that the house of melody and lyrics can be built. As long as the drums don't step all over them and provide the space and support they need to shine. I tend to try and get under the singer to cradle the vocals, and pick the spaces where there isn't singing to swell and enlarge my drumming. It's just music, man. And I try to play musically. And finally, whomever is paying for it usually owns it. So I must serve that vision, that mission. I must be confident, but not cocky. Be funny, but not clownish. Be humble, but not timid. Be patient and trust the process. And everyone has their own process. Try to learn from them. Be generous, but know your worth. Take direction and give them what they want, but more importantly, give them what they need. Don't push personal ideas and agendas, but offer them when it's appropriate. And most importantly, be grateful. We all have only a limited time on this physical plane, so savor every moment and make magic. Cast spells. Get lost in the process and enjoy every note. These are the concepts I remind myself of every time I show up to a session and walk through the studio doors. These are just my opinions, and in no way would I assume that these are the right ways to record. These are just some of my thoughts on recording, coming from a long career and history of trying to capture lightning in a bottle. And it again reminds me of my 3 rules to living a good life. 1. Make cool shit with cool people. 2. Help people. And 3. Try not to be an asshole. Thanks for listening. Bye. My name is Matt.